Oh, Pringlebot. Oh, what a lovely device that was. Mostly because I got to eat all the Pringles before I built it.
You had to. You had to, right?
I had to, yeah.
However, I didn't like Lego. I can't be doing.
Well, I don't know if you know this about me, but I quite like Lego.
You're the opposite to James. James loves Lego. Hello and welcome to Hello World, a podcast for educators interested in computing and digital making. I'm Carrie-Anne Philbin, a computing educator, content creator, and not, I repeat, not a robot.
And I'm James Robinson, a computing educator, trainer, and I'm working on projects promoting effective pedagogy within our subject. If you want to support our show, then subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a 5-star review.
Today, we're diving into the world of robotics in education and asking, are these the droids you're looking for to teach algorithms? So, James, have you ever built a robot with your students?
I have. Robotics is one of those subjects that I absolutely love. And I think my interest in it kind of started back as an NQT, a newly qualified teacher. I went on a training session where we got to use the Lego RCX bricks, these old robotics kits where you could beam signals over infrared. And I think in my first year, I tried that with my students who really enjoyed it. And that kind of really cemented that passion for robotics with me and my students. And over the years, in my experience, I've done a number of different sort of schemes of work with students and entered competitions. And it's just something that I think, they get a lot from, I get a lot from, and it's really enjoyable.
Who gets the most from it, you or the students?
Well, I don't know if you know this about me, Carrie-Anne, but I quite like Lego. We often use a lot of the Lego robotics kits. And so I think, personally, like the prep for lessons where I'd be building Lego models for the kids to play, like that, I got a lot from that. And I definitely get a kick from seeing the sort of physicality and the physical side of computing. And I think that's really interesting. But I think, the kids equally, they get a lot of enjoyment and challenge and frustration, but also reward from the experience. So I think it's in equal parts, but maybe in different ways.
Well, I'm certain that your enthusiasm for Lego and robotics and just computing in general probably transferred. I think if the students see that you're excited about something, then I think they also feed off of that excitement and interest anyway. But what did you find were the challenges? I mean, some of these kits can cost quite a lot of money. I think sometimes it can be difficult to find the time in lessons. What were the challenges that you found with doing it?
I mean, I think there's a number of different challenges whenever you're doing something that involves kit. And I think, you've alluded to cost. Cost was a bit of a challenge. I think we started off with a club. And as we've mentioned before in previous episodes, great spaces to do, some informal introduction to concepts, but also tools and hardware. And we did a competition. We entered the first Lego League. And we used one robot kit, a small group of kids. We saw the impact, and through that I was able to kind of convince my school that we could invest. I think one of the challenges is also about organization, and you'll be surprised to learn this, Carrie-Anne, but my robotics kit was very organized in school. We had a box and racking system. It was all
I don't believe
inventoried. No, it was very organized. I can still picture it. I think there's challenge over, it was a scheme that I wasn't necessarily always teaching myself. Other teachers were teaching it. So there was a bit of upskilling of staff around me. But I think one of the challenges that the students often found is whenever you're entering that kind of the physical space with computing, particularly robotics, there's often a difference between what you tell the robot to do and what the robot does. That's a challenge. And we always found the weakest point of our robotics competitions was never the programming. It was always, I want to build a robotic arm that's going to move this thing over here. And the kids would sort of stick together 3 bits of Lego, the flimsiest little robot arm you've ever seen, with no mechanism, is it? And it was that design and mechanics that was their kind of, that they struggled with more so maybe than some of the programming concepts, which I found really interesting. And maybe just that was just my experience. But I think, there are a bunch of challenges here. But I think if you can overcome them, then it is such a rewarding experience. I remember, actually, you've got a bit of experience with robotics. I remember, it was a couple of years ago now, but I remember your Pringle bot that you made.
Pringlebot.
Can you remember Pringlebot and tell our listeners a little bit about Pringlebot?
Oh, Pringlebot. Oh, what a lovely device that was. Mostly because I got to eat all the Pringles before I built it.
You had to. You had to, right?
I had to. Yeah, I had to do that. Yeah, really. I mean, robotics for me as a computing educator, I would often try and look for ways to inspire my students with different things, different activities and things. And people used to always say to me, robotics, do robotics. And then what they would follow that up with was, look at this robot arm. And then they would show me this robot arm, which quite often was an off-the-shelf purchase, plugged in to a computer via USB. And they had programmed it to lift something up and put something down. And I felt like I was the only person I would look around and be like, no, hang on a minute. You're telling me this is the greatest thing ever and this is going to inspire my kids and this is what robotics is? Because to me, I just wasn't getting the same excitement from that. So I've always had this really tenuous, not negative kind of outlook on robotics in education because I couldn't see past the robot arm. And then one day I met a teacher called Bill Harvey. And Bill Harvey presented to me a biscuit tin. And this biscuit tin had motors and it had wheels and it had little eyes and it had sensors everywhere. And you opened it up and it was full of electronics. And then Bill said to me, I made this with my students. I started an after school club with my 9 to 11-year-olds. And every week we just start, what do you want to do? What do you want your robot to do? And then they would make it do that thing. And then the next week, so they started out, let's just get some motors working. And the next week was like, well, okay, we want to build it into something so it can move. And they thought about recycling and upcycling stuff. So that's where the biscuit tin came from. And then the next week they would say, well, I want it to stop hitting the wall. So they would add an ultrasonic sensor so it would measure the distance and not hit the wall. And he said to me, look, Carrie Ann, I'm only 1 week ahead of these kids. Like my subject knowledge here is not, this is not my background. I'm just learning as I go along, based on what the students are asking for, and we're doing this together. And it kind of really opened my eyes to what was possible. And at the same time, I met a teacher called Nick Hughes, who was doing a lot with crumbles with that sort of age group, that kind of young age group. It's a sort of microcontroller you can program with block-based programming, which makes it great for young children. So I was messing around with that, and then I sort of remembered Bill and saw a can of Pringles, stuffed them all in my mouth very quickly to empty the can of Pringles, and then turned it into a bit of a chassis. So my journey into robotics in education was a sort of very strange, I didn't come at it from the same way you did, which was sort of full of excitement and enthusiasm. I was very dubious about it. And actually it was by learning through other teachers that it could be an interesting journey with my students. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I remember Bill. I remember Biscuit Bot, but I also remember he told me about one of his students was he brought in a roller skate.
Oh yeah!
I really want to make this roller skate into a robot, and the kids were just bringing in anything that could move, anything with wheels, and just turning it into some kind of robotic contraption. And I just loved that concept.
Yeah, he said the kids would just go home, and then the next week they'd come back and they'd brought in a new thing, and they'd say, "Can this be a robot, sir?" And he'd be like, oh, well, I think so. Yeah, why not? Let's give it a go. And I think it's that project-based learning, that kind of doing, kind of creativity, kind of all the things we've talked about in previous episodes sort of really coming to the fore. I think one of the things I get confused with, and James, I'd really welcome your expertise on this, is where does physical computing end and robotics start? Or are they both, two arms of the same body? Or, what's your kind of take on that?
That's a good question. I don't know if there is a definitive answer, but I think my interpretation, my view would be that robotics is kind of a subsection of physical computing. Physical computing being how we describe the broad space of using computers to control the physical world. I think robotics is a space within that where we're focused quite a lot on automation, but locomotion and movement as well. So I think it's a particular kind of area within physical computing. That would be my take.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I went and I did a very teachery thing. I went and checked the dictionary for the definition of the term robotics, which actually really helped, because the definition says that robotics is the branch of technology that deals with the design, construction, operation, and application of robots. And I think that is really, really interesting, because I think what we've talked about so far has been about design and construction. You talked about your students being quite weak on construction, but really good on operation, right? Because they can program the robots. Yeah. But I think that aspect of the application of robotics, I think, is where the Pandora's box can really open up, that it can be very inspiring. Yeah. So robots can go to places that we as human beings can't. So you think about Mars right now and the technology that has been placed onto Mars to kind of give us more information about that planet. Robots can go into dangerous situations as well and clear landmines and do amazing things there. Robots can help us, sort our rubbish into recycling and non-recycling and so on. So I think it's the application of robotics that I think could be the thing that draws our students in, and the design, construction, operation aspect is the bit that really links it to computing.
I think that's a really good point. You've just literally reminded me of my cycle ride yesterday. There's our local hospital is campaigning at the moment for fundraising for a robot for surgery, and there's lots of posters of like the surgeon saying, "I can't rotate my arm through 360 degrees. A robot can," or that kind of thing. And so it's very much focused on the advantages that the robot brings to that space. And I think that's also what drew me to a lot of competitions, is that it was often like the robotics was set within a theme or a context or a challenge that really helped the students understand the application. So yeah, I think I completely get that.
I think it's clear that we're both super enthusiastic about robots, robotics in education. I wasn't always, but I think I'm there now. But is it really true for young learners? And even if it is, how can educators provide a great experience whilst overcoming the challenges? Thankfully, we don't have to answer these questions on our own. We're joined by two fantastic guests who are going to share their experiences. So joining us now is Nikki Cooper, an award-winning former subject leader and advanced skills teacher in computing, who as part of home learning recently ran a robot week for her children. Where did this idea come from, Nikki, and how did you approach it?
Well, the idea actually came from my 5-year-old son. He's really interested in robots. We've seen films like Big Hero 6 and WALL-E, and he's absolutely fascinated. And we were doing, obviously, at home learning. He's been learning from home since January until we went back to school. And at February half term, he really wanted to have another themed week to go along with his home learning, but we could choose the theme. So he chose robots. So for me, I've always been enthusiastic about robots, so I kind of did a little dance for joy inside, and then realised I had quite a lot of work to do because I wanted to make it really, really engaging for him and his younger brother, who is 3, and make an experience where we're not just drawing pictures of robots, we can actually build something really cool. So that's where the idea came from.
I think that's really interesting and brave of you to sort of just say to your 5-year-old son, "What do you want to learn next week?" But I think, and how did they respond to what you'd planned? What kind of activities did you put together for them? You say that you wanted to kind of go beyond just drawing, but what did they make? What did they come up with over that week?
So the first thing we focused on was building a junk robot. And I wanted to do a bit of planning with this. So I made a little design sheet and to help them out a little bit. And they drew what they want their robot to look like. I had a basic outline so they could give them a starting point. My 3-year-old mostly just coloured his in bright colours, but my 5-year-old really thought about it. He put some arms coming out the sides, and it had a little face on it with some eyes coming out of the top. And it was all based around a Costa coffee cup, because that's what we had those to hand. And my vision for this was to put the cup on top of a Sphero robot, so then they could actually make it move around as well. And the idea was to program it using the Sphero app. Although I hadn't realised at the time that we had the old Sphero and it wasn't compatible with the educational app. So we had to sort of kind of bodge it to work with the old app again on the tablet. So it was a little bit temperamental, but the idea was great. And the boys really loved it, and they loved watching their little coffee cups moving around a maze. That was quite exciting. And we also had the Mars rover landing was in half-term week as well on the Thursday. So the Thursday was all themed around the Mars rover. So we we had a scavenger hunt to learn about all the stages of landing. So I read those back to the boys and we put them in order. And we used Scratch Junior to program a virtual Mars rover. So we programmed it to first land on the surface of Mars. Well, my son programmed it. I was quite impressed. He did most of this independently. And then I'd made a map, a maze on rocks, and he programmed the virtual robot to navigate around the maze and get to an alien at the end. So I was actually quite impressed with his programming skills using Scratch Junior to do that.
And you spoke about, I mean, you know, your sort of little dance for joy when he mentioned robotics and your own passion for robotics as a subject and an area. Where does your interest in robotics come from, and what's been your experience back in the classroom?
Well, I've always really loved robots. As a child, I was desperate to build a robot, but it just wasn't as accessible back then as it is now. And in a classroom environment, I've got a secondary background actually, and I used to run a robot club using Lego Mindstorms. So as soon as that became available in the classroom, I kind of jumped on that, and thankfully the school bought me a few sets of Mindstorms. So we used that as in a club environment and built robots and programmed them using that, and that was really successful.
And do you think that robotics is something that has universal appeal? Or is it? I mean, because Carrie Ann and I shared at the top of the show that we've got slightly different experiences when it comes to coming to robotics. Is that something that is borne out by your experience with learners, or is this something that has universal appeal? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it does have universal appeal. It's just it's advertising it in the right way. I had both boys and girls in my club, although there were more boys than girls that were interested in the idea of building Lego robots. After that school, I worked in an all-girls school, and we did have Mindstorms there, and the girls were interested in it. I think it depends how you market it to them, because there's obviously all different purposes for robots. So you've got like the fighting aspect on Robot Wars, which is more appealing to some of the boys. But when you also look at how robots can be used in the real world, like rescuing people, operations like you mentioned already, and even down to performance robots, think of Disney animatronics dancing robots, you've got a really broad spectrum that kind of covers a lot of interests. So it kind of depends on how you theme your topic to try to get the most people interested in it.
It's that application again of robotics, which is the sort of the hook, the way you bring the different groups of young people into the space, I guess.
Yes, yeah. It's very visual as well, which helps a lot of students as well. They can visualize what they're doing, which is beneficial, especially for younger children.
What are some of the challenges in teaching with robots? And I mean, you've mentioned some pretty specialized equipment. You know, if you're doing Lego Mindstorms, and there's sort of a price tag on that, and even with some cheaper components, there's still a sort of challenge of cost. But what are the other challenges in teaching it?
Well, again, yeah, like you say, it's budget's the main issue. I've not really used robots in actual lessons. I've more used it in a club environment and at home, because then you can have smaller groups. Otherwise, like you say, you need a class set of something, and that's not within budget. One of the other issues we've had is things like connectivity. Even with the Lego Mindstorms, sometimes it would seem very randomly not to connect to the computer when you're trying to send your code across, and obviously then the children get impatient and they might lose interest. And if I had a large group, it would be really impractical, because I'd have maybe lots of issues to deal with at the same time. So that's kind of why I've stuck to a club environment. Also, the need for batteries as well can obviously be a bit of a hindrance. You think your batteries are charged, or you've put new batteries in, and then someone's batteries run out, and you've got the changing of batteries is another problem that can occur with the Lego sets. And sometimes I found them a little bit distracting. Like with the Lego Mindstorms, my students loved building, and they would spend ages finicking building their robots, and then we'd run out of time to do some of the programming that I'd like to have done a bit more. So sometimes the distraction of building can overweigh the actual programming side of things.
I think you touch on a couple of really interesting points there. I think that are indicative of all physical computing experiences, that the moment we start to cross that barrier into the physical world, there's lots of logistical little challenges that you might have to solve, and you're introducing another kind of debugging that you might have to do. So, oh, my robot's not working. Is it because of my code? Well, actually, no, my code's fine, but the wheel's jammed, the tire's fallen off, the batteries aren't charged. It's not getting the program to download. And I think all of those little things, like, they can be really frustrating, but I think if you can think about them and plan for them and build that sort of debugging into your lesson, then that can be really, really helpful. And I think also that distraction point as well. There's lots of activities where, you could do, this is not necessarily just for physical computing, but when you give the students a scratch activity, for example, and how much, we've all seen it when kids sort of spend 20 minutes picking their costume rather than, putting some code blocks together. So I think it comes down to there as about framing and thinking really carefully as an educator about what do I want my students to get from this experience, this lesson, this scheme of work, and making sure that you're doing things to mitigate against those distractions. Maybe you're building some of the robots for them beforehand, or you're providing them with a very simple base model so they're having to not do quite so much adaptation. But I think that's a really interesting point. I was going to ask about the young learners. So I think obviously you've got some experience of both secondary, but also working with younger learners with your boys at home. What can educators do to make robotics more accessible to that younger age group?
The physical use of robots, I think, is really enjoyable for children of that age group. They like to press buttons and make things happen. And I've seen a lot of good uses of tools like a Bee-bot. And we've got at home a kind of smaller version of that. We've got a Code and Go robot mouse. That was my birthday present a few weeks ago, actually, for myself. It's been really fun doing that with my boys because it's screen-free as well. So they press the buttons in a sequence and they make the robot mouse go around a track. And it's been really fun watching them explore that and seeing what they can do with it. And without any connectivity problems, they can get straight involved. They can work independently on it as well without having to wait for me to get a tablet out or a computer or wires to connect it. It's all, they can just use that. And it's been really rewarding seeing them playing with it and making the robot.
That sounds like loads of fun.
The cheese.
My birthday's coming up, maybe. I might have to put that on my list.
I mean, I think one of the barriers for teachers in bringing even physical computing, let alone kind of delving into robotics into the classroom, sometimes is kind of the idea of having really strong subject knowledge or feeling confident enough to do it. What kind of tips would you give to teachers?
I would probably say start with a small group of children. So start off in that club environment with some enthusiastic children so you can kind of learn what the hurdles are, like we've mentioned before. And James made a really good point. You can then, if you've got a small group of children, you can prepare a bit more beforehand, like building some sample robots. And if you're using Lego, for example, starting off with the small groups, I think is the key. And then if things do go wrong, you've only got to debug maybe 3 groups projects rather than a whole class environment. And that will give you more confidence to maybe try it with larger groups and bring it into the classroom.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just trying things out and not being afraid to sort of not have all the answers. And, doing it in that club environment, I think gives you the freedom as a teacher to show that you're enthusiastic, but maybe don't have all the answers. And you can go on that journey together, like Bill Harvey, who I mentioned right at the start, him telling me that he was only ever 1 week ahead of where the kids were in terms of the knowledge because he was learning kind of with them. And he seemed to have created a really nice environment where everyone, a kind of safe learning environment where it was kind of okay not to know things. And I think that probably helped him with his confidence too. I think that would help me with my confidence in this space.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. As teachers, we all kind of want to make sure we're well prepared and well ahead of what the children know. And then that can sometimes be a barrier to trying new things because we're so worried about getting it wrong or for the children to see that we don't know things. And like you say, it's okay to show that side and it's okay to show the children, actually, I don't know. Let's see if we can find out together and go on that journey. Like you said, I think that's really important.
I think it's interesting how frequently during our conversations over the last few weeks with the various guests, Carrie-Anne, that idea of starting small in an informal space, that's come up a number of times. I think it's a really important point that we should sort of underscore again in this episode. Because again, not only as we've said, does it give you the chance to prepare your skills, but you're giving the students the experience. You've got some expertise in the students. You've got some allies in them because they know that this is a really good, fun thing and they can kind of help out in lessons. So I think there's just so many benefits to doing it in that way. So yeah, I think that's a really good point to reiterate. Thank you. Our next guest is Zofa Zainon, a computing teacher who recently wrote an article for Hello World magazine called More Than Robots. Welcome, Zofa. What about robots interests you?
Well, the fact that something actually moves, doesn't that sort of make you just want to go and do something? I mean, I'm a software engineer, so everything's like behind the screen, everything's tidy. You expect certain things to happen, it happens, you test it, you change your code. However, things moving on the floor, self-driving cars, I've always wanted to do. For a long time I wanted to do it, but it wasn't always possible because there wasn't the thing that you could get to do it easily, cheaply. And then Raspberry Pi came along that made it possible. Arduino was available. We tried that went on eBay quite quickly. Raspberry Pi didn't go on eBay because there's always a new version, and who wants last year's version, right? So that made it possible. So, and then I thought, because I'm really good at programming, this is going to be so easy. It wasn't, because like I said, are not quite connected well. There's light source, so the line following doesn't work very well. You think, oh, this robot is going to nail it. We went to Pi Wars. The controller does not connect to the robot. So there's nothing you can do when that happens. Bluetooth magic did not happen. So, yeah. So, I mean, I started off very negative, didn't I? But what I really like is the fact that, something physical. I know, James, you did a lot of physical thing at school. However, robotic in the classroom, Raspberry Pi in the classroom, it takes too long to set that up in 1 hour. And, I didn't really want to sort of take stuff out, pack it out at the end of the day. So it became a club. The club was perfect. I mean, because when James was at home, he already did robotic. It was always expected kind of for me to do the same. However, I didn't like Lego. I can't be doing with all these Legos all over the floor.
You're the opposite to James. James loves Lego.
Absolutely. So all those Lego bits all over the place, the robot moving, Lego falling off. No. So that's, I mean, eventually we started off with Pi Wars. We started something called VEX. EDR, because there was company based near Ely in Whichford that sponsored us. So they bought us a kit. So we tried that. However, that didn't really take off because there are a lot of competitions all over the country, all organized by different people. So when you are sort of planning your year, you always, because robots are never complete, you think, oh, we'll go to the next one, we'll go to the next one, we'll go to the next one. So we spent the whole year, didn't sign up to any competition. We did have a small local competition with Ely College and Whichford College, where we went to Ely College and then we pick up stuff, deposit it somewhere, that kind of thing. However, we are now in the 3rd year of FTC competition. However, this year is a bit of a washout, as you can imagine. We had a kit, an expensive kit. I can deal with that. Everything's in there. You just buy bits, everything kind of just plug and play rather than soldering and all that. So that's a very, very long why robotics? Did I throw everything all in one go?
Well, I learned a lot from hearing you talk so well about, it's very obvious that you are a teacher who is not afraid to try things. And I think that's what I've learned, is you're very kind of open to trying different technology, you're open to trying different formats. And the question I wanted to ask you, you talked a lot there about competitions, and I wondered, the role of what, clearly competitions play an important role. So for you, do they help drive the development of the robots in your after school club, or is it just something that helps set the parameters? What is it about competitions that really help you with doing robotics?
Okay, well, when we had this small competition between Wishford and Ely College, the guy at Wishford and the company that sponsored us wanted it to be a bit like a sports team for geeks, going to competition, from time to time with other schools. That didn't quite happen. But I think the fact that you have a team, the fact that you're working towards something rather than, okay, you build it. Okay, brilliant. Dismantle it, do something else. But having that focus means every year we can develop the robot. For example, our robot in the first year can't even grip anything. The whole claw fell off. So the second year it didn't fall off. We had a different design. This year we are building a different drivetrain, so we are going mechanism wheels so we can strap. So it's like, because there is a competition, there is a goal inside that competition. You are upgrading your skill, upgrading your kit, and the kids are developing new knowledge as well.
I think that occurs a lot of my experience with competitions. It's that element of teamwork and focus and common goal that kind of helps, and I think you also mentioned, like, I remember once when we were doing a competition, and there was not really a kind of a fixed deadline, and that just meant that you would procrastinate and say, well, we'll do the next thing. And I think it's really helpful to have a deadline to work to. So that I think that's really motivational. And I think I like your philosophy almost that you're kind of sharing there about, it's not necessarily about this season or that season. It's about learning from the first season and, applying what you've learned to the next season and the next season and the next season, and gradually kind of improving your team's capability. So I think that's really, really interesting. There is kind of a question wrapped up in that. What do you get from that experience of entering competitions?
I'm not sure what I get, because surely as a teacher it's about what the kids get. I enjoy taking the kids on trips. I suppose I'm quite old. Do I need to build robots? That kind of thing. I could just stay at home and do gardening, for example. So at the end of the day, I think it's about the kids. The kids enjoy it. I like taking them on trips. For example, we got really excited about planning our hoodie for the competition last year, because we were going to go to London because we qualified to go to national. So we thought, a hoodie, parents said, yeah, we'll pay for hoodies and all that. So for the kids, it sounds like the main goal is to get a hoodie to go to competition. However, because of first lockdown last year, that didn't happen. So, it is sad, but for me, it's just planning that trip, going on that trip, seeing the kids enjoy themselves, blossom. Quite a lot of the girls who were in the team are quite shy. So it's quite nice for them to talk to people. They were they thought it's weird that people still speak to them. It's just about taking kids on trip, I think.
And do you see any doing it in the informal space? It would be interesting to know what age group you do this with, but if they are sort of at an age where they're sort of 12, 13, and they are girls, do you see that passion and interest from the after school club then translate into them taking qualifications and taking options in computer science?
Absolutely. I think we have a lot of interest from girls who started off with robotics who go on to do computer science. So we start at 11 at SOM. So they have 3 years of key stage 3 where they is they study a broad range of subjects, and then for 14 and 15 they choose to do GCSE. So I've had girls who started robotics in year 7 who's like, yeah, we've signed up to do computer science next year. However, it depends whether they get, they said, do you think we'll get in? My head of year told me you have to be good at math to do computer science, and I'm saying, is that a problem? So they said no. So why are you asking? so so they were worried that maybe they wouldn't get on, but I think that interest has been really amazing. It has really translated. Now hopefully we will keep having girls at robotics that will then translate to computer science and maybe even A levels and all that.
And if you were to give your top tips to any teachers who are listening, who are thinking about perhaps running an after school club, starting with robotics, and doing it with kind of an older age group, so from age 11 kind of upwards, what would be your top advice?
Join the FTC, sign up to FTC. So First UK. Yeah. So firstuk.org. Sign up. I think I paid something like £100 every year to, not so much for anything, but to sign up to the competition for the year. But in my first year, I also got the £1,000 worth of kit. I spend a very small amount adding to every year. So sign up. They kind of like push you along, check up on you, post stuff to just move you along the school year, because I don't know, I guess if you're teaching, the teaching becomes the focus, and sometimes all these extra bits sometimes get forgotten, or that, oh no, is it competition next week? So it's helpful to have someone chasing you up along the way as well. So I think this year's sign-up fee is only £45 or something like that.
And so for our kind of global audience of listeners, I think the advice is kind of find something similar, I guess, sort of a coding...
Well, no.
Okay.
First runs all over the world. So it started off in America, and the competition is all over the world. So I guess there might be some countries where they're not running the competition, but somewhere a bit more, a country closer to you than, say, to have to go to America. I don't really know exactly where they are, but they do run all over the world.
Well, we can put a link in the show notes for anyone who is interested, who is listening. So we decided that we would ask the same question of our audience, and we put something out on Twitter. And we asked, what are your experiences teaching with robotics in your school curriculum or club? Is it something that excites you or fills you with dread? What's the benefit for learners, and how do you overcome challenges? And Nick Hughes, who I mentioned right at the top of the show, actually, our good friend Nick Hughes, who's at Duckstar on Twitter, he said, it never fills me with dread, but it does require a lot of organisation, of getting all the bits and pieces together. I love robotics and physical computing because it allows children to apply things in the real world. It generates that wow factor you get when you first make Scratch the Cat move. Making the LED flash, that motor or servo to spin is great fun, and kids love doing it.
And I really like this thread that I found, and it was a whole thread from Caroline Keep, who's at KA81 on Twitter. I think she expressed that she's been a passionate advocate of robotics in her sort of setting, and she has this year she's invested in some reusable kind of kit boxes that she purchased from a local supplier, and found those really useful just for that kind of solving some of those logistical challenges. They're built on microbit. they're for Key Stage 3. They roll them out, they go, they can adapt, change it, and then they move on towards Raspberry Pi builds a little bit later on. And they felt that was, by the time the students get to their Raspberry Pi builds, they are so well versed in GPIO and code and components, they pretty much just build the robots themselves these days. And then that means that they can concentrate on the code. So I think she felt like that journey was really, really important.
And that's kind of echoed really by John Witz, at John Witz on Twitter. Robots have always been a firm favourite with students in our physical computing unit. James, you and I talked about physical computing and the overlap with robotics. A great experience for learners and lots of opportunities for greater understanding of programming and physical building available too.
I think that's really interesting. They're very positive comments. We also had some comments around sort of feeling like they want to engage in robotics, but they feel that there's maybe some barriers in the way. So Jemima Puddleduck on Twitter talked about the fact that they would love to engage in robotics, but the cost is prohibitive for their school. They know that there is support available, but can never seem to find it when they want it. And they also felt a little bit uncertain in their own sort of knowledge and experience. They work in a very deprived area and felt this would be a game changer for them. So I think the advice for people like that is there is support out there. If you're in the UK, you can potentially get involved in one of the trials that the National Centre for Computing are running in the UK, where we are loaning out kits with content to teachers to help them do some of this robotics and physical computing in their classroom. So I think do reach out. There is support available. Even if it's hard to find. But if you have a question, you can get in touch and we can answer that question.
And that kind of goes for everything on the Hello World podcast. If you have a question for us or a comment about our discussion today, then you can email via podcast@helloworld.cc, or you can tweet us at helloworld_edu. My thanks to Nikki and to Hafizah for joining us today and talking so eloquently about their experiences of robotics in the classroom. You can check out Hafizah's article coming out in Hello World issue 16. So, James, what did we learn today?
I think I've taken away that learning in informal spaces in robotics is a really useful way of engaging in that new content and new sort of products and software and so on. How about you?
Well, I've learned that hide all your Lego is probably number one, and that when you were teaching, you were very organised in your kit, which I still don't fully believe, having known you for quite some time.
I was organised there, but not in other areas.